Thank you.
Well, hello, good morning, and thanks for inviting me. I'm Cheryl from Milwaukee Riverkeeper. I'm just going to talk to you a little bit about our group and the work that we do and how we use monitoring to inform a lot of our other work, our pollution response and restoration work. And just give you a sense of what we do. Let's see if I can get this to work here. There we go. So for folks that haven't heard of us before, we're a nonprofit organization. We're really a science-based advocacy organization working for clean rivers, clean, fishable, swimmable rivers. Our mission really is to protect water quality and wildlife habitat in the Milwaukee, Menominee, and Kinnickinnic River watersheds. And we're really working for, clean rivers that everyone in the community can enjoy. We've been around since about 1995. We started actually as Friends of the Menominee River, and then changed to Friends of Milwaukee's Rivers, and now Milwaukee Riverkeeper. But we're celebrating our 30th anniversary this year, and so there's gonna be a big party in the fall. So hopefully folks can come to that. So Riverkeeper, I get this kind of a common question I get. What does that mean? We actually are part of a larger umbrella group called Waterkeeper Alliance, and we're one of 320 different organizations in 43 different countries that are essentially advocates for our local waterways. We're each individual organizations. We have our own boards, we do our own fundraising, but we're kind of loosely affiliated and really working together on a lot of national and international legislation around protecting water and really just learning from each other. So it's a really incredible network that we're a part of. We're really an independent watchdog for the river. A lot of what I do for my job is to respond to community concerns, identify sources of pollution, and then work with a lot of different agencies and partners to find solutions to those problems that are affecting the river. We do have a physical patrol boat that we use downtown, which is kind of limited geography in our basin, which I'll show you in a second. But we use that to monitor, and we also do a lot of proactive monitoring throughout the watershed, which I'll also kind of touch on. But I also review all the permits. So anybody who's discharging to any of our waterways, anyone who's going to pull like a Chapter 30 permit, doing any development along a waterway or a lake in our basin, we receive those permits and review them, and often comment on them, occasionally contest them, but that's pretty rare actually. But just really keeping an eye on the water and what's going on. So the history of Milwaukee's waterways is pretty incredible. I should say I'm originally from Chicago area. I have a lot of cousins who have houses on the Fox in Illinois. So very familiar with it. But I moved to Milwaukee. I've been there for about 23 years now, and it really has an incredible history. And I think before pre-settlement, before European settlers came in, it really was this gathering place by the water for a lot of indigenous people. And our three rivers are depending on who you talk to, Algonquin or Potawatomi, and Milwaukee really is based on a Potawatomi word, which is the good land, and also the gathering place by the water. And our other two rivers as well, the Menominee is based on an indigenous word for wild rice. And the Kinnickinnic is based on a word that refers to a ceremonial mixture of tobacco. And so that was a big part of the history of Milwaukee. And this is kind of one of the earliest maps that we have in Milwaukee, showing kind of what the downtown portion of the rivers used to look like. Clearly that was, there's a lot of, this was pretty much all marsh and wetland in downtown Milwaukee, if you're familiar with that area today. And it was obviously dramatically transformed into what we have today, which, it was obviously transformed for shipping. And you can really see that huge difference here in the inner port of Milwaukee and how kind of that area was changed over time. And, one of the reasons Milwaukee is there is really because of the access that the three rivers provided, really to the north with the Milwaukee River, to the west with the Menominee, and to the south with the Kinnickinnic, to really abundant resources that existed in the watershed. And so, harvesting those resources really was the catalyst for economic development in our area. And I think as a lot of people know, not only is Milwaukee known for breweries, and it was really known for manufacturing. We were creating about 80% of the nation's rail cars at one point in the Menominee Valley, which is this far right picture, but also had a lot of tanneries and a lot of industry that really have left a mark and a legacy of pollution, which in a lot of ways we're still dealing with. And I'll probably touch on that a little bit toward the end of the talk. But, you know, we really had a lot of issues. It was pretty common, really Clean Water Act, for the rivers to catch fire. You know, the Cuyahoga often is the one that people think of that kind of had national prominence, but it was pretty common for Lincoln Creek and the Kinnickinnick and other rivers to catch fire back even in the early 1900s, because there was so much pollution on the water. Somebody, you know, would basically burn a leaf pile and it's, you know, ignite a river next to it. So, you know, we had a lot of issues, and there's some really, you know, colorful descriptions. If you've seen John Gerda's, if you've read his book or seen any of his presentation, he has pretty amazing accounts of how bad the river really got back then. It was like the effluvia of 1,000 sewers and like words like that, were not really the way that you want to, you know, talk about your river. So this is a really amazing picture, which someone dug up a couple of years ago. It was the 50th anniversary of the Clean Water Act, but this is downtown Milwaukee on the original Earth Day. And there really was this huge movement, you know, to clean up the water and deal with a lot of the legacy pollution that we have. And, you know, we really use that as a water group to, you know, inform a lot of the work that we do every day. So the Clean Water Act, really the broad goals of it are, you know, that clean, fishable, swimmable, drinkable water. But the water quality standards that are part of the Clean Water Act are kind of based on a couple different components. Designated uses, which is how the waterways are being used, and that impacts the kind of protections and standards for the waterway. The water quality criteria, or, you know, what that minimum need is for oxygen, temperature, different parameters for protecting the water. You know, what are those kind of levels that we need to meet in the stream to make sure that we have life in the rivers. And then there's also an anti-degradation policy, which is a big issue in Milwaukee, in that we want to continue to move in the forward motion. We don't want to backslide or, you know, or get worse water quality over time. And so there's a lot of different opportunities within the Clean Water Act and the implementing legislation to have some impact. Every 3 years, there's what's called a triennial review, where the DNR comes in and reviews really in the state what are the priorities for implementing the Clean Water Act. And there's also a impaired waters list every 2 years, which gives you an opportunity to talk to the DNR about, you know, these are the rivers that we're concerned about. These are rivers which we think have gotten worse. These are rivers that have improved. And being on that list isn't really magical, but it does kind of identify your river as one that needs more assistance. And that could lead to something like a TMDL that would need to be created to ratchet that pollution down. It also, technically, you're not supposed to be able to add any new or increased pollution into an impaired water. So, you know, knowing kind of what rivers aren't meeting those standards can be really helpful for a lot of the work that we do. And so I just kind of wanted to set that as a base of some of the stuff I'll talk about later. So this is the Milwaukee River Basin, for those who probably aren't familiar with this shape, a little different than the fox. It's approximately 875 square miles. And about 500, we have about 500 miles of perennial river and an additional 400 or so miles of intermittent and ephemeral stream, probably more than that, because we really don't know where a lot of the ephemeral waters are. But in total, about 403 miles in the Milwaukee Basin are impaired. And so that means they're impaired for something. Often, many of our river sections are impaired for multiple things. Our kind of biggest challenges, and I'm probably getting ahead of myself, are bacteria and sediment and phosphorus, which I know is an issue on the Fox as well. And we can talk a little bit about that. And we do have still 18 miles of trout streams in the upper part of the watershed. So I should say our watershed really starts up in Dodge, Fond du Lac, and Sheboygan counties, which is kind of the very top of the map, and then runs down into Washington, Ozaukee, and then into Waukesha and Milwaukee County. And all the little red squiggles that you can kind of see on this map, hopefully, are those impaired waters. So those are areas that are not meeting the standards for something. But this is a big area, and we have many dozens of municipalities that we work with, as well as these 7 different counties to try to ensure that we're protecting the water. Okay, there we go. So, you know, the Clean Water Act did a really good job of addressing what we call point source pollution. And a lot of that is, you know, I think historically has been industry and wastewater plants. And one of the newer kind of issues is the CAFOs, the confined animal feeding operations. So larger farms now also are permitted. but the smaller farms are really not permitted, as we know, and that's a big source of non-point source pollution in our watershed. About 80% of the Milwaukee Basin is still considered rural, and pretty heavy agricultural in areas. And in general, a lot of the runoff too from residential wasn't really, at least with the original Clean Water Act in 1972 wasn't included. There were some amendments that were done in the 80s, like in 87, that then triggered what's the basically municipal stormwater regulations, which started, I think, around 1990 for the larger communities. And then slowly over time, a lot of the smaller municipalities had to start, complying with those stormwater regulations. But originally, those sites were not included in the Clean Water Act. And I think, one of our biggest challenges that we have, I think in the Milwaukee, and I'm guessing also in the Fox, are really these non-point sources of pollution, which is just all, a lot of nutrients, a lot of pollution coming from a lot of disparate sources. And that can be pretty challenging to deal with. So this is kind of a laundry list. I'm getting cut off a little bit on the top here. Sorry about that. I'm not sure if I can fix that. But, in addition to point source pollution and non-point source pollution, we have a lot of issues with trash in Milwaukee is a huge issue that we work a lot on, flooding and basically hydrologic changes. So we still have a lot of river that was basically concrete channelized for flood management back in the day. The idea being that if we, covered our rivers in concrete, that would kind of send the flooding issues further downstream, which it largely did. But then further downstream, they started having problems and had to concrete that portion and then the next portion. So we have, quite a few rivers that are underground that were buried in culverts, and some of those are being daylighted now. And then also this really kind of legacy contamination, which I mentioned before, which, in some cases dates back to the founding of the city. But also a lot of other different problems with people not being able to access rivers in different parts of the watershed, water diversions, other issues that we work on. So we largely divide our work up into 4 different buckets, which is protect, restore, connect, and advocate. And I'm just going to kind of touch a little bit on each one of those and the work that we do. So let's see here. So we're part of a lot of, I think, along with a lot of different organizations involved with setting up the original kind of framework, I would say, for community monitoring in Wisconsin that happened, I think, around 2006, if memory serves. But really setting up the DNR at that time set up this tiered monitoring system for community-based groups that were doing monitoring. And so I think we really kind of started, I think, maybe becoming a little bit more serious about monitoring around that time, around 2006. And now we have several different water quality programs, and I'll kind of touch on them all. Our baseline water quality monitoring, which is really based on the Water Action Volunteers program with Wisconsin DNR. But we're also monitoring for road salt, emerging contaminants, mussels, and started to do some PFAS monitoring as well in the last couple of years. So really just trying to use that, again, just to identify, issues and sources of pollution in the watershed that we can address. So as part of the Water Action Volunteers program, we have people that go out May through October, and they really test for those baseline contaminants. So things like temperature, oxygen, conductivity, pH. We have a subset of our volunteers that test for phosphorus and bacteria as well. And so I think this, the last kind of report card that we did, and I'll talk about that in a second, was 2023, but we have about 95 different volunteers right now that are testing about 88 locations. I think last year we were closer to 100 locations. And so folks go out and do that core testing between May through October. All of our data is submitted into the DNR system, which is called SWIMS. And we also have our data also goes into the EPA water quality portal. But that is a very significant amount of time. When we started this program, I should say when I started with the organization, I've been with it for 23 years, I think, which is crazy. But we only had 1.5 staff, and I kind of did everything. And we have 10 staff now and 4 AmeriCorps interns. So I kind of miss, I actually don't do a lot of the water quality trainings anymore, and I miss it. I do kind of randomly show up a lot of times, but But, you know, it is a lot of work. We basically have two staff that are supporting this program right now, because there's quite a lot of work to, make sure that all of the volunteers, the 95 volunteers, are well supported and have what they need and are, calibrating their equipment appropriately. So we do quality assurance checks, and then also just make sure that folks have the conductivity solutions that they need, that all their equipment's working well, troubleshooting problems, that kind of thing. So I think community science, is very important. It fills a really important data gap. I think we often get questions from people, the DNR is doing this, why are you doing it? We actually, in the greater Milwaukee area, the Milwaukee Metropolitan Sewage District does a lot of monitoring. And so in that greater Milwaukee area, we're collecting about 50% of the data. Outside of the MMSD service area, we're collecting about 90% of the data. And so those are for our watersheds that are kind of in the higher part of our watershed. And so that's data that would not be collected if we weren't out there with volunteers doing the data collection. And so that's really important for us to help us identify projects and things that we want to do, but also is used by DNR for those impairment listings, for making management decisions, fisheries decisions, and helping, track the long-term health of the waterways. So I think it's really important. And I think in addition to actually collecting the data, it's really connecting people to the water. And we'll talk a little bit more about that as well. And I think how important that is. So this is just from our recent report card, which is the 2023 report card. You can kind of know how much you can see from where you are, but all of the kind of colorful points that you see on the left are sites that are being monitored, and then the shape of the site is who's monitoring it. I should say too, all of our report cards going back to 2010 are available on our website. But this 2023, that our basin got around a C-, which is, we've been hovering at a C or C- from a good chunk of the last 10 years. But, and so this really just helps us track every year. We create a report card, and it really summarizes all of the data that's being collected by our volunteers, by the agencies. In our case too, Ozaukee County does a lot of data collection. So we collect everybody's data in one place and then kind of look at how well we're doing meeting all of those water quality standards. And we really give grades for each site and each sub-watershed and each watershed based on like the percentage of data points that are meeting the standards. So either federal standards or state standards for different parameters. So I just kind of mentioned this already. These are just all the different data partners that we look at and we are including as part of our report card. So this is just an example of two different watersheds that are featured in the report card. To the left is our east and west branch, which is probably one of our better watersheds. For folks that are familiar with this part of the Milwaukee River, the east branch is essentially the Kettle Moraine North of DNR's state park. Really beautiful area, tends to still have pretty good water quality. And then the west branch is much more heavily agricultural. This creek used to get A's and B's, and I think 2 years ago it got a B-, and then in 2023 it got a C+. So we're starting to, and a lot of that really is nutrients. We're starting to see, we're not seeing really positive trends in nutrients as of yet. And also having some issues with bacteria there and conductivity as well. But this one of our better watersheds, and it's about 233 miles in that sub-watershed, 48 miles of those are impaired. And so our report cards too just talk a little bit about where we think a lot of the pollutant sources are coming from, like fertilizers, runoff from hard surfaces, septic systems, wastewater, things like that. And then the Kinnickinnic River is kind of one of our consistently poorest watersheds. This actually drains the Milwaukee Mitchell Airport and is mostly concrete channelized, although MMSD is working really hard to take all the concrete out, or good chunks of it, I should say, out. But that watershed generally is around somewhere in the D range, has a lot of challenges, not only with kind of our core pollutants, which are kind of that phosphorus, bacteria, TSS, but also, I think having some issues with oxygen occasionally in the summer as well, which is, a bit concerning. So one of the things that we started monitoring for fairly early, we were actually part of a It's kind of a long story, but the short version is we were part of a lawsuit with about 7 other organizations where we actually filed a notice of intent to sue the US EPA. Based on the Clean Water Act, all of the states were supposed to put in nutrient standards by 1987. And if the states didn't do that, the federal government was supposed to come in and put them in. And so we knew phosphorus was a big issue. There was a lot of other similar groups in the state that were also concerned about phosphorus. So we filed a notice of intent to sue the EPA and said, you never put in these nutrient standards, we want you to do that. And they agreed and basically said, we'll do it. And then EPA went to the state and said, well, if you don't put them in, we're gonna have to put something in. And that really resulted us in getting phosphorus standards in 2010. So around 2010, we started testing for phosphorus just so that we could have a baseline of where we were and so that we could also assess the effectiveness of a lot of the work that we're doing collectively over time to see how well we're meeting those standards. But as you can see, this is a kind of summary table from our 2023 report card, and pretty much all of those grades are Fs. There's a couple Ds, a couple D pluses in here, and a C plus in the estuary downtown, but it's still a real challenging pollutant for us. We test, we have about 100-ish sites now. We're testing around 65 of those for phosphorus, partly because of the expense. We have to take those samples and send them to the State Lab of Hygiene. So I do 3 sites on one creek called Pigeon Creek and Mequon, and I only do a phosphorus test at one of those. And that's really just also for saving money, which is also important, especially if you're in community groups that are fundraising for all this testing, and it does rack up. But we have about 42% of our streams are impaired for phosphorus. We actually have seen a few come off the list. The phosphorus levels are improving, which has been really cool. But as we're starting to monitor creeks that have never been monitored before, we're getting some additions to that list as well. Road salt is another area where we've started doing work around 2010. At the time, USGS was, I think really, our USGS people in Wisconsin were real national leaders in chloride monitoring, and a lot of their funding was getting cut back. So we, I think along with Sugar River Watershed Association, piloted a bunch of chloride testing back around 2010, and to kind of create a community protocol for monitoring chloride in the waters. And so we've been doing monitoring since then, and actually even a little bit before then. But this kind of map is showing some of the data from 2006 to 2019, and all the darker reds and red dots that you see, and even yellow dots, are sites that are very high for that. I should back up. There's 2 different levels or thresholds for chloride in Wisconsin. There's one that's an acute, which is a level where we think there could be instant harm, deficient aquatic life, maybe even death if the levels are high and prolonged. There's a lower level kind of standard, that's the chronic standard, where you have to exceed a number for 4 days in a row. And so our volunteers go out in the winter, and sometimes they break through ice. We recommend they don't do that, but some of them do. And they go out and test really when we think there's going to be big runoff events, and we'll have them go out and test different water quality sites. And so this is just a map of those at the acute level, which is a really high level of salt. And I'm forgetting what it is, but it's like 757, something like that. Anyway, any of these red dots that you see in here are sites that have exceeded those standards, and in some cases dozens of times. The really heavy reds that you see kind of around here are a lot of sites like Honey Creek and Underwood Creek that are draining I-94. Not surprisingly, you see one red dot kind of further up in the watershed, which is a creek called Uleo Creek, which is draining I-43, kind of up on that Highway 60 area in Grafton. So we're seeing a lot of road salt issues. We've been really going around and trying to hit a lot of different types of streams over the last few years to measure streams that have never been tested before. And we're really finding that our most impacted creeks are like those smaller creeks, really, because I think the runoff is more concentrated, and really our concrete channelized creeks where there really isn't a lot of groundwater coming, groundwater can't really come in there and ameliorate any of the water quality in those areas. So those creeks tend to be pretty impacted. They're also in a lot of the most urban parts of the city. But on our 2024 list, about 117 different miles of river were impaired for chloride. which is a lot. And we don't have a chloride TMDL yet. I don't know if we'll ever get to that point, but you know, it is a problem that the more that more monitoring we do, the more testing we do, the kind of different site, you know, different problems pop up. This is just showing the sites that we monitored in 2024. And then the red squiggles are all the areas of river that have been listed as impaired for chloride. But, you know, we've been working really hard the last, probably since about 2010 to do education. We do every year, we have a educational course that's done for public winter de-icing folks with our cities and counties. And we also have a private course, which is really designated more toward facility managers, landscape managers, folks like that. And we've been doing about 2 trainings every year on more sustainable winter de-icing practices and really switching more to the brines and different products that can dramatically reduce the amount of chloride that's being applied. And we also just do a lot of community education about road salt. And so we get a lot of folks, probably dozens of calls every year of areas like this that are very heavily salted. And you know, it's really educating people that you don't need that much salt. You know, like a coffee cup is generally enough for a driveway or about 10 sidewalk squares. In situations like this, you can sweep up that salt and reuse it. You know, if you leave it out there, it will eventually, you know, run off into the waterways over however long, right? So really just encouraging people to be more smart about that, you know, not salting. You know, we have areas of Miller Park where they were like, you know, removing like snow and salting in the winter. And it's like, why? There's nothing happening there. Like, so if there are whole parking lots that you're not using in the winter, or certainly during the pandemic, this was the case, people weren't going to work. Why are we still plowing the lots and salting? It doesn't make any sense. So there's a lot of work that we're doing on that, and also some advocacy work that we're working on with partners like Saltwise in the state to try to get some legislation passed that would give some liability protection, especially for private entities. I think for cities, they are very highly incentivized to use less salt because like the city of Milwaukee and other towns are literally saving like tens of thousands of dollars or hundreds of thousands of dollars reducing that salt use. But a lot of the private contractors get paid every time they go out. So they're kind of incentivized to go out as much as possible. I think we saw that this year. I don't think we've ever had as many exceedances as we had this year. And it was a very mild winter, but people were still going out and de-icing. And so we've seen some very high samples this year, which I really wasn't expecting actually, because we had a very mild winter for all intents and purposes. So bacteria monitoring, we also do at a subset of our sites. We have about 108 miles of stream that are impaired for bacteria. And if you look at those bacteria grades again, they're mostly Fs. I think there's a couple of Ds in there. But that's a big issue for us. We worked for about 10 years with a professor at UWM to monitor outfalls, and especially in areas of the river that we knew because of sewer packs work that were very high in bacteria. So we started testing all the stormwater outfalls that discharged into certain parts of the rivers. And that kind of started a decade-long project of monitoring that kind of still continues today. But we found about like well over 50%, and in some cases over 60% of the outfalls we tested were positive for human sewage. So we started out really just looking for E. coli. And actually the monitoring that we do with the volunteers still is looking mostly for E. coli. The problem with that is a lot of, you know, cities obviously it's very expensive to deal with bacteria if there's like a sewer issue. So, and they always, you know, we always get like, oh, it's the raccoons living in the sewer, it's people's dog poop or whatever. And it can be those things as well. Those are sources of bacteria, but we have started doing genetic testing in recent years to really look for human sewage and to prioritize pipes for more diagnostic testing and more repair. And that's huge because we do have, you know, roughly half of our stormwater outfalls that are very high in human bacteria as well. So we know that there's some sort of infrastructure issue that needs to be addressed. We started doing some trout stream monitoring in the last few years. We kind of started off with, I think, counting the dots here, about 6 sites last year. We're hoping to add about 6 sites this year. And we just this is really doing continuous dissolved oxygen monitoring in addition to our hourly temperature monitoring that we've already been doing since about 2010. And that's because a lot of our trout streams are warming up to the point that we might not be able to support trout in them if we don't continue to start to do more proactive work to protect those watersheds. And so we're working really hard to just get more information and understand what's going on up there, and then hoping to be able to plant trees and do some other management in the future to help ensure that those cold water creeks stay cold and can support the brook trout that we have that are still remaining in a lot of those areas, as well as sculpin and some other fun critters. So I want to talk just briefly, looking at my time here, about how we kind of use this data to try to influence policy. And, our data we really think has helped, as I mentioned before, list a lot of our rivers as impaired. And again, that just gives us a kind of an action plan of creeks that need a little bit more work as far as ratcheting down pollution going into those systems. So we have about 370 miles that have been listed as impaired for phosphorus, about 108 miles for bacteria, and 117 for chloride. And a lot of that data helped inform a regional effort that really was decades of work by Sewer Pack and a lot of consultants, folks probably in the room as well, to create total maximum daily loads for the Milwaukee River. So we have three. We have one for total suspended solids, one for bacteria, and one for phosphorus. And so that kind of, and I think probably, I don't know if it's the most robust data that we have, but we have a really good data set, I think, for the basin. So again, we have a good sense for each one of our stream reaches, how much pollution needs to be reduced to meet those standards. And so that really helps us prioritize, and hopefully is helping the counties and the cities as well as prioritize projects to remove that pollution from the water. It helps inform, where buffers need to be put in, where rain gardens and other stormwater management practices can go in. And so we certainly are working in partnership with a lot of folks to try to use those plans to, minimize that pollution that's getting into the water. So I was going to talk a little bit about, these are very colorful, beautiful pictures of pollution that we've seen in the rivers over the years. And so this is a big part of my job as I get calls from people saying, the river's chartreuse. Should it be, or there's a geyser coming out of the bottom of the Milwaukee River. Should there be a geyser? No. So, a lot of, and I would say a lot of this is really our water quality monitors probably call in about 80% of our pollution issues, and really because they're the most closely connected with the river. So they know what's normal, what's not normal. And we also obviously get a lot of tips from homeowners and people that live along the river that see problems, but we probably get around 200 calls a year. And as things start warming up, the calls start coming in a little bit more fast and furious. As part of our report card, we've started to try to just do better education around, I get a lot of calls like, I saw something in the river at this place, so just making sure that people know that they can take pictures are really helpful, videos are really helpful. Like now with our phones too, right? You can drop a pin and actually have an actual location. That's super helpful, so that we can kind of go out and figure out what's happening or try to figure it out. And also just promoting the DNR tip line number as well, which is 1-800-TIP-WDNR, especially if there's, oil spills, fish kills, things that are happening that, need to be responded to very quickly. That's a 24-hour staffed line. And so just making sure that people are aware of where they can report pollution, certainly to us, but also straight to the agency. And that takes up probably a big chunk of my job is responding to a lot of those issues and trying to figure out what's going on. So restoration work, we do a big river cleanups every year. We started in 1995 doing river cleanups. The cleanup this year is on the April 26th, which is a Saturday. It's a little bit late. It's normally always on that Earth Day Saturday, but that's Easter this year is really late. It's like on the 20th. So our river cleanup is going to be on the 26th. We generally have like between 4,000 and 5,000 people that come out that day. So it's a big event. It costs like over $100,000 to fundraise for that event, to pay for the trash removal and the bags and t-shirts and all of that good stuff. But I love that day. It's like instant gratification day. I like to run around and look at all the trash that has been pulled out. But it's a really good way for people to connect to the water also, and you know, I see people's kids grow up, you know, doing cleanups every year and going on to like environmental careers and things like that. So it's always really fun for us as well. But that is something that we do. We also have a program called Adopt a River, which we work with MMSD on. And I think that we're up to around over 150 groups that are like churches, businesses, community organizations that go out and more regularly clean up different parts of the river. And then in the last few years, we've started to do some tree planting as well. And we're hoping to do more of that in the future because a lot of our creeks aren't as trashy as they used to be, which is a good problem to have. So just trying to, you know, direct some of those volunteers to do more invasive species management, tree planting, and that kind of thing. So we also do a lot of outreach and education around really educating people in the community about big work, you know, work that's happening. In a lot of cases, work that's happening from others like MMSD and counties, cities, just making sure the community is aware of the work that's happening. This is like, these are kind of just pictures of some big MMSD projects to remove concrete channels. So we, you know, are in a lot of technical advisory committees and working to make sure that the community's needs are incorporated into those projects as much as possible. And so we go to a lot of meetings, but we've been working with a lot of different partners too on that larger project to remove concrete channel in the Kinnickinnic and convert, you know, what looks like a concrete ditch into an actual stream. And that's been, it's a really exciting and cool project to work on. We also work with a lot of municipalities as well, just to do, you know, stream bank stabilization type work. This was a site that we did up in Menominee Falls a few years ago that was kind of threatening a water main. There's another, this is a project that we did in Elm Grove near Tonawanda Elementary to restore a wetland there, make it a better asset for education. Oops. And then we also have worked over the years on some fish passage projects, and this is a small dam that was removed on Pigeon Creek in Mequon. And it was really just creating like a pond at a Lutheran seminary, but that we were able to remove that pretty inexpensively. And then often too, we're just working in cooperation with counties to remove other dams. The one on the right here is the Newbert Dam. And this is just a map of, I don't know how easy it is for you guys to see this, but there's been 11 different major dams removed in the Milwaukee, and really that does take a village, as many of you know who have worked on dam projects. But all the green dots that you can see on the map are dams that have been removed in the basin. The two blue dots correspond to fish passage structures that have been placed. The top one is a very recent fish passage that was constructed by MMSD around the Clutch Park Dam. The bottom picture is a larger fish passage that was built around the Mequon-Thiensville Dam some years back. And so the whole lower Milwaukee River now, we have removed all of the dams, and actually there is a fish passage that's being built in Estabrook Park to just help, especially the pike and the sturgeon, get over a kind of a rock ledge that was left from mining and quarrying operations. That project's going to be built hopefully this summer. And then after all of that work is done, all of the dams will be out on the lower Milwaukee, which we're very excited about, except for the Grafton Dam, which has been a bit of an issue. That dam is considered right now by the Fish and Wildlife Service as a lamprey barrier. And so we kind of started talking with them about it again. There is a plan for removal of that dam that Ozaukee County funded as part of a grant, but there were some issues right before that project, and that dam never ended up coming out, and it might not come out. We'll see, but the federal government thinks it's a lamprey barrier. We don't have lamprey in our river. They've been in the lake since the 1930s, and so it's like a problem it's like solving a problem that we don't have. I guess the concern is that as the water quality gets better, it could become our river could become more attractive to lamprey, which is an invasive species in Lake Michigan. But we kind of feel like we could deal with that problem if and when it happens. But we still have that one dam. And then up here at the very top, the dots that you see are two different dam removals that we're working on. And I think I have a picture of them in a couple slides, but we're working with to remove the Cascade Dam and also the Gooseville Dam and the north branch of of the Milwaukee River. Those two dams, when they're removed, will open up about 54 miles of stream all the way down to that Grafton structure. And then there are still quite a few smaller dams on tributaries and a couple big dams left in kind of the West Bend area. But this is all just work that collectively the community has done over the last few decades, and it's really led to massive fisheries improvements. We've gone from about 4 species of fish in the downtown portion of the Milwaukee River to about 45 different species of fish. And a lot of that is based on work from over many decades to get these dams out and to allow the fish to actually be able to reach those spawning areas that exist largely kind of in the mid and upper part of the basin. So I'm kind of transitioning to advocacy, which is also a big part of, I think, what our organization does. And I think we need a lot more. I think every waterway needs an advocate. We get a lot of calls from people around the state too, and we try to support where we can, but we, have our own limitations and staff. But you need it. A lot of these projects, removing the dam is the easy part. It's the advocacy that takes a long time. The Cascade Dam, we talked to them about 10 years ago. They weren't really ready. They've spent about 10 years looking for money for dredging, haven't been able to find that money. And finally, we're kind of more amenable to us coming in and hoping to remove that dam and put in a stream. And I should say that's the part of the North Branch of the Milwaukee River that is a brook trout stream, class 1 trout water. So it's a big project for us. We're really excited about, a little concerned about federally what's happening with a lot of the dam programs and whether they'll still exist. I've written $2 million worth of grants in the last 2 months. Not really sure if that money is going to be left into those funds or not, but we're working really hard to continue to do that work. And so this is the Cascade Dam on the bottom, and then the top one is a very small dam in an area called Gooseville. It was an old timber mill. That dam actually failed between 2006 and 2008. And the whole impoundment drained, but the dam is still kind of in place and causing issues, especially during lower water. So, these are our work projects that are really important, can really make a massive impact to water quality, but you really need to, fundraise, get permits, and obviously really doing the advocacy piece around convincing folks to remove the dam is the hard part. One of the projects that I'm most proud of is the Esbrook Dam removal, which some folks might be familiar with. This is kind of like the pre and post picture. That dam, it took about 10 years to remove. We had 4 different lawsuits at one point against against Milwaukee County mostly, one against the DNR to try to get that dam out. And involved, we had petitions and videos and a lot of press and, a lot of field trips to the site. It took a really long time. And then I think at the end, had kind of a big assist from City of Milwaukee and MMSD coming in and helping us get the structure out. But, these projects sometimes take a long time, and often if you have a group that's around that can kind of continue to push for that, it's kind of really the difference between being successful and maybe not being successful. But certainly we don't do any of this stuff alone. A lot of this work, we're still a fairly small nonprofit, so we really do need to work with our government partners in a lot of cases to get these things out. So one of the other things we do is really try to kind of connect the dots with the community about water quality and how that impacts, people's daily lives. Increasing public awareness, doing a lot of talks like this to let people know about what's going on with the water, and then responding to a lot of pollution concerns. We have an advocacy listserv. We just sent out a couple action alerts in the last few weeks, more around trying to help protect NOAA funding, which is that threat. There's a Komatsu had an oil spill a few years back now, probably about 2 years back, where we were able to actually detected that spill. Was reported as a 1-gallon spill, and we just kept seeing more and more oil coming down, and it turns out it was a 400-gallon spill. And anyway, that's still kind of some issues going on with that. But a lot of times it does take somebody like calling it in and being able to go out there even like during the winter, during different times of the year, to kind of keep an eye on the water. We do a lot of call to actions and action alerts. We also have just an e-newsletter that goes out every couple of weeks that lets people know different things that are happening. And then we also, try to promote just individual actions that people can take to improve water quality. I'm going to try to run through these really quick. Just have a couple left here. Emerging advocacy, in addition to the dam removals I mentioned, we are with a group of people litigating on I-94's expansion, and that's between essentially 70th and 16th Street. So it's essentially that Miller Park or American Family intersection area. About the eastern part of that's the combined sewer system. The western part is separated sewers where the runoff goes right into creeks, draining into the Menominee River. So, I don't think we're going to stop the highway expansion. We might, but I think really why we became involved is really trying to push for better stormwater controls. There was more money being spent on sound barriers than there was for stormwater management. If you don't really push for funding, you're not going to get it. And so that's something that is really important to us. We also have a lot of other friends and co-plaintiffs that are really looking at more environmental justice issues, because these same communities continue to get impacted by highway expansion, and there's not money for transit. So we're really pushing for some permanent transit routes in this part of the city as well, that could help negate the need to constantly be expanding the highways. They're adding like 45 acres of impervious surface in just that one project. And it's also a cumulative impact thing. We've just had a large expansion at the Zoo interchange, a large expansion downtown at the Marquette interchange. So all those projects together, send a lot more polluted runoff into the river that we're working really hard to clean up. And so it can sometimes feel like you're running to stand still. So, we kind of come together with a group of plaintiffs to really push DOT to do a better job, and trying to see, that's just kind of in the very beginning. We're waiting actually for a lot of files from them. That's been a little bit delayed because of federal mayhem, but I'm hoping to make a difference with that project. Also just working on some CAFO issues in the upper portion of the watershed, as well as supporting kind of smaller groups that need some help and guidance. We're working with a group in Trenton, another group too that's in the Plymouth area right now that's trying to battle against a large transmission line that's going to go over our highest quality creek and take out like an 80-foot swath of trees in that same Coldwater Creek that I was worried about getting warmer. Is that my time? I am probably pretty close to my time. So where is the hook coming? So we're working a lot with community groups to try to support other groups too in their own struggles in different ways. So I just have like a couple slides left. I wanted to talk quickly about our area of concern project. This is a special EPA program that helps clean up areas that had really significant amounts of legacy pollution. And we've been really involved in that effort, really going back to the 80s, or I shouldn't say the 80s, probably the mid 90s. But the AOC program started in 1987, but it's really focused on, helping a lot of the areas of the Great Lakes that have the most industrial pollution. And Milwaukee is one of 43 areas in the Great Lakes that were identified as being kind of extra polluted, if you will. So the intent of that project is to clean up a lot of the legacy contamination, and that's a lot of the pollutants that are still at the bottom of the river. Pre-Clean Water Act, probably heading back to 1846 when the city was founded, maybe even before then. They do find very interesting things when they take their sediment samples. They're coming back with like horsehair and crazy stuff. But, we are basically working to, I should go back, to dredge about 11 miles of river, which are roughly, it's not really completely these yellow lines, but it's about 6.5 miles of the Milwaukee River that's still left that hasn't been cleaned by past cleanups. Because we've had two fairly large cleanups, one for $50 million in Lincoln Park, and there was about a $20 million project in the Kinnickinnick. But we're basically going to be dredging about 6.5 miles of the Milwaukee River, 2 miles of the Menominee, and about 2 miles of the Kinnickinnick River. And really getting out a lot of that contamination that still has like PCBs, PAHs, heavy metals, things that are probably, impacting a lot of our water quality that we haven't really been able to do much about. So it's really a generational opportunity to clean that up. In addition, there's about 24 different habitat projects that are being done, largely land-based, removing invasive species, but a couple fish passage projects and aquatic-based projects to help facilitate passage of fish. And so, for example, some of those projects, some of that money did fund or helped fund the Estabrook Dam removal, and the Kletch Park Fish Passage was funded with some of the AOC funding. And so a lot of work and I mean, incredible amount of meetings and people working together on getting those projects done. And then also there's a couple of different projects to improve the swimmability at beaches. And I don't know if any folks have been down to South Shore Park, but they've been doing construction through the whole winter to actually move the beach in South Shore Park. And that's because the water quality there was basically bad about half of the year. It was kind of consistently on a beach bumps list of the worst beaches in the country, which is not a list you want to be on. And so part of this program has funded moving that beach a little further south, where there's an opening in the gap that just allows better mixing and better water quality. And then, so that should be done by this June, hopefully by the time people are ready to swim in Lake Michigan, or maybe July. Lake Michigan can be cold till like July. And a couple other projects that are happening on a few other area beaches. And these are kind of all of the partners that are involved in that project. So we're just one of many folks that are working collectively to do that work. And these are just kind of the different teams that are working, but there's different teams working on sediment, working on beaches, working on fish and wildlife, workforce training. And then I'm also on the Community Advisory Committee, which is a group of folks that are helping to really make sure the community is aware of all the work that's happening, and to the extent possible that we're able to incorporate into these projects, you know, public access, different things that are benefiting the local community that's going to be affected by a lot of the projects. So that's been something that's been taking up a lot of our time, but I think is really a generational opportunity to improve water quality. And then just lastly, we do a lot of connect events. And so this is paddle events. I think we have probably 10 to 12 already scheduled. If folks, we do have a Riverkeeper news that you can apply. You can just like put your email on basically on our homepage. And those, you get an email kind of every 2 weeks, but it kind of talks about all the different educational opportunities, paddling events and stuff that are going on. And we also have an action alert that you can sign up to be part of, that's really focused on advocacy at the state level, local level, federal level. And I just wanted to end with, we also have a water trail. I'm very excited to hear about the Fox Water Trail. But we started ours in 2006, the Milwaukee Urban Water Trail. And we did, 2006 was our original map, and then we got funding to update it in 2018. And I hopefully am we need more copies. We went through 10,000 copies in the last like 5 years or so. But we also have a website that we've just created, which is MKE urbanwatertrail.org. And so if anyone's interested in coming down and doing a paddle with us, I encourage you to check out our website and come paddle with us on the river this summer. You can also, see the water trail on our website, or you can also request that we'll send you a paper version from the website too. All right, so I talked longer than I was going to, but I think we maybe have 5 minutes for questions. Do you have 5 minutes? Yes? Yeah. Thumbs up. Are there any questions? Anyone have any questions? Yes, sir?
I appreciate your presentation, the holistic view you have of the world of water. Your conversation about advocacy. It's a fair statement. You're doing advocacy work with the locally elected policy types, the state policy types, and the federal policy types. You're doing advocacy with them.
Yeah. So the question was like, what kind of advocacy do we do? Basically, we are advocating with all of those folks. So we've been really involved with a coalition of groups that are working on PFAS regulations in the state right now. We have surface water standards and also drinking water standards for public utilities, but no groundwater standards, which is, really 2 of 3 people in the state of Wisconsin drink from private wells. And so those folks have no protection with PFAS right now. So we work in partnership with a lot of groups on important state legislation. And we, to make sure that we're protecting our waters at that level, also participate in quite a lot of federal lobby days as well. But I think most of our work really is working at the municipal level. And often, the cities, I think, want to do more for the rivers. But, I think as most of you probably know, I mean, there's so many demands on the cities and city resources, and they just don't have necessarily, even Milwaukee, which is our biggest city, they don't have like anybody dedicated to rivers. They have an eco and environmental sustainability division, but they are mostly doing renewable energy stuff. So often, if there's projects that are important to us, like we've fundraised to put in piers in downtown Milwaukee. We fundraised for a lot of other municipalities to do stream bank restoration, wetland restoration. We do a lot of grant writing in order to help enable those types of projects because often the cities just don't have the resources themselves. So I think we work very closely in partnership with a lot of our cities, but we also do, advocate. One of the things I didn't include in here that I'm really proud of was we worked together, we brought a coalition together to advocate for the Milwaukee River Greenway, which is like an 8-mile, 800-acre area of the Milwaukee River that we got protected with the overlay zoning. Because we had a lot of people coming in and clear cutting so that they'd have better views of the river, that kind of thing. And the downtown Milwaukee River has very wide floodplains, largely because of a dam removal that was taken out, the North Avenue Dam in the late 90s, that left these large floodplains. So that project was really to make sure that we were protecting the floodplains and the bluffs from development, which we were having a lot of issues. We were trying to be a little bit more proactive. And then also that's enabled a whole coalition of groups to get together to do trail construction, access improvements. And so there's a lot that you can do too at zoning level. We actually have two other kind of issues that we're working on right now in Farmington and Trenton that have large zoning components around making sure that the regulations of the towns aren't facilitating, more runoff to the river. So I encourage folks to try to keep an eye on those things. And it's hard. We have dozens of municipalities, so we're certainly missing things, but we do try to keep track of those opportunities where we can advocate, for the river. Can't speak for itself. Yep.
So you mentioned writing a lot of grants, but I wondered how else do you fund your organization and your work?
Well, thank you for that question. We do write quite a lot of grants at the federal level and the state level, but we also have members. So we have, I think, around 5,000-ish members that send, whatever they can on a yearly basis. We have some local foundations, including like Fund for Lake Michigan and Brico Fund, Brookby, that have been incredible supporters of ours for years. So private foundations are a big piece of that. And like for certain events, like our river cleanup, we have some very strong business support, community support. We've got some, funding from folks like Potawatomi and the city of Milwaukee too, and some of the other cities will help us with those cleanups. And so they might not necessarily approve of all the advocacy we're doing, but they really are funding like kind of event specific things. And that event has a heavy price tag. So we definitely get, I think, a really good variety of community and business support for those types of events. And also like for our water trail, we've gotten a lot of support from outfitters and folks like that. So yeah, we have really kind of a mix of funding, but it's a constant challenge for sure. I got the stop sign. Well, thank you so much. I will be around through lunch. Find me. I'm happy to answer any questions and feel free to keep me on.